Hey, you random stranger. So we've been building towards this moment for months now. We have finally hit episode 13, the last episode of ODDTAXI. Every seemingly random thread is finally being tied together, including the mystery of Mitsuyo's murder. So at this point, there's a 95% chance that we do actually know who murdered her. Let's start with Odokawa. So we have talked about how unnervingly calm he is in the face of life-threatening situations, whether that is having a gun pointed at his head or when he's plotting to bring down an entire criminal organization. The more compelling mystery for me on the show actually was to discover what made him that way, and episodes 10 to 12 filled in more of those gaps, especially through Goriki, who went digging into Odokawa's past. He found out that Odokawa's parents died in what was officially ruled as a possible double suicide after their car crashed into the sea, and then Odokawa was the sole survivor. Think about what that can do to someone. Odokawa survived the worst possible thing that could ever happen to a kid, and his mind just shut off and sealed him off from all of it. That's a well-documented trauma response, when an experience is too traumatic to be processed in the moment, and the brain just dissociates from it all entirely, effectively locking away those memories just so the person can keep functioning. The problem is that other things also get locked away too, including grief. And when you don't process that grief, something else kind of grows around it, like this deep, persistent sense that you're here when you probably shouldn't and other people should be. That's survivor's guilt, and that's my working theory of what might be going on with Odokawa. He's not just feeling bad about being the only one to survive that accident, but feeling undeserving of his continued existence. And in Odokawa's case, the dissociation that caused that has been sitting there for so long that it's just become part of who he is, like his baseline. So what looks like someone who's very stoic is really someone who's learnt to live completely removed from their own inner life. And with that, any instinct that he is entitled to anything at all. When we look back on Odokawa's behaviors and the things that he said, that framework makes sense to me. Like when the Tapia crime boss asked whether he really doesn't want any money, and Odokawa said that he doesn't want more than befits my stature. It was a very understated way of saying that he doesn't believe he deserves much at all. He can't stand owing anything to anyone because underneath it all, he feels like he should have nothing. I mean, really, he should be dead. So when I was thinking about all that, I just sat back and I was like, damn, that's really depressing. The ultimate irony that the show seems to be building towards is that the very foundation who paid to raise Odokawa after his parents died is likely the same foundation that he's now trying to bring down. Whether he knows that or not, we still don't know if the gang had anything to do with his parents' death, because that also would just add irony on top of irony. Okay, Dobu and Yano. So we found out in these last episodes that they weren't always enemies. Yano actually was a bit of a protege of Dobu's, and you can just totally picture it, right? Dobu springing his tough but insightful street wisdom and philosophy on a younger, more impressionable Yano, the same way he gave Taichi, that free counseling session. But Yano outgrew him, or so he thinks. Yano is still very immature in a lot of ways, and the show keeps reminding us of that in very literal ways. So on top of that scooter that he rides around on, there's the tin of candy that he carries in his pocket, which was a great detail because he took it out while dissing Dobu as something very soft and sweet. There's also something very childish about this rivalry that he now has with Dobu. Like, it's not just about winning, but it's proving to himself and to Dobu and to his boss that, he's a big boy now. Dobu, meanwhile, presents himself as a man with principles. He's violent, but he sticks by a criminal code of conduct. He's all about justice, street style. I think the show was really clever in how it kind of made us buy that act for a little bit. I can only speak for myself, but I remember after he set Taichi right and surprised us with his very deep psychological insights, I was like, maybe there's something more to Dobu than we realized. Maybe he is this complex, conflicted character. Like, he's violent, but there's a justifiable logic to it. And it's not just us, the viewers, it's Odokawa and Miho who were also hoodwinked by Dobu. When Odokawa was like, Dobu might not be such a bad guy, I think it would have been accurate if he was talking about a genuinely morally complex character, which I don't think Dobu is. I think he just presents that way. Also, when Odokawa said that, it was doubly disconcerting because he said it in front of Miho. You know, the woman Dobu had physically and emotionally abused over several years. Also, the woman that Odokawa, in just a previous episode, had noted showed signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Sad but not really surprising was Miho agreeing with Odokawa. We know that her attachment to Dobu has compromised her sense of judgment about him, and that's just the sad reality of survivors of abuse sometimes. So yeah, the show did a great job of showing how Dobu kind of succeeded in convincing almost everyone around him, at least temporarily, that underneath his violence was something principled and moral. Dobu is not cartoonishly evil. You know, I find it more unsettling than that. Some people are just very good at constructing a version of themselves that makes others forget just how bad they actually are. The moralizing, the constantly referring to a code that they keep to, making themselves out to be, you know, better than those other criminals who just work for money. It all functions as a cover for the deeply selfish person Dobu actually is. Someone who ultimately won't do anything that doesn't benefit him and who doesn't really value human life. And because we, or society at large, are predisposed to find someone who is complex, kind of sympathetic, we tend to eat their shit up. I mean, you probably don't have to look very far today to see how that plays out in the real world. You know, politicians and celebrities, they kind of rely on that, yes, I am morally compromised, but I do it for a reason, and, you know, it's complicated. I'm not saying that people aren't complicated, you know, because some people are, but then there are also people who take advantage of the moral cover that complexity can sometimes offer. Someone similar to Dobu who also believes his own spin about himself is Yamamoto, I feel. So he kept pushing Odokawa for the dashcam footage because he's covering up what happened the night of Mitsuya's murder. And what's unsettling about him is that every time he talks about Mystery Kiss and the girls, it's always wrapped up in this language about shared dreams and sacrifice and how much he does for the girls, but I don't buy it at all. When Odokawa exposed his honey trap scam, Yamamoto went into full-on murder mode, but then Miho showed up. The way this was set up was beautiful. You know, in every previous scene that Miho has appeared in, she's been kind of shown as quite vulnerable, even though obviously she's very witty and can hold her own and has an edge. It's either been centered around her painful history with Dobu or her pleading with Odokawa to forgive her, to no avail. But this time, she just dropped in on Yamamoto with those capoeira moves, which had an awesome soundtrack to go with it. And it was just 10 seconds of pure cathartic bliss. She's not just a victim, and she's always had that fight in her. It was just made manifest in this kick-ass scene. Afterwards, Yamamoto asked for forgiveness, and Odokawa was like, sure. Only Odokawa could be fine coming to an agreement with someone who had just moments before attempted to murder him. But that's who he is, and we kind of already talked about why that might be. So he proposed a plan for bringing down the gang, and Yamamoto agreed because he doesn't really have a choice. You know, it was either that or be arrested by police. However, notice that when he agreed, he again framed it as kind of like this noble sacrifice for a mystery kiss. You know, like anything for the group. I think what makes Yamamoto sus is how extraordinarily self-important he is. Everything he says suggests that in his mind, Mystery Kiss exists all because of him. He made it what it was. And sure, the girls are key, but really he makes it tick. Also, he only really cares about the girls' well-being insofar as they contribute to the group's success. And we saw that in how he responded to Mitsuya's murder by helping cover it up and lying to her parents about it, all for the sake of keeping the business of the group going. At this point, the mystery surrounding Mystery Kiss is no longer that mysterious. Like, we almost have all the facts and can pretty much deduce who killed Mitsuya. So the body in the sea was confirmed to be the real Mitsuya, and the moment that Odokawa saw her face on TV, he was like, that is not the girl I drove to the Mystery Kiss studio. This whole time we, or I, and everyone in the show had assumed that Odokawa had picked Mitsuya up in his taxi, when really on the same night that Mitsuya was found dead, he'd actually driven a Mitsuya lookalike to the studio. meaning that Sakura was likely the one who murdered her. It's just too much of a coincidence. The real Mitsuya had blue eyes, whereas Sakura has green eyes, but it's probably only a detail that Odokawa could have been able to tell. The show's done this before, like actually quite a few times now, where two separate events were made to look like the same event. And so it kind of makes you link the two events incorrectly, and I just think that's smart writing. It makes sense that Sakura is the murderer. She failed at the Mystery Kiss auditions, but pretty much was next in line, so it made sense for her to off one of them. She also gives a bit of, I don't really know exactly how I got this, but like stalker fan vibes, and she was completely fine with taking on Mitsuya's real name, all for the sake of becoming a famous idol, and kind of also giving her mom a better life, which is sweet, but also don't murder for your mom. I did like how the show set up Nikaido as a culprit just for a little bit. You know, she resented Mitsuya for outshining her in every conceivable way. Like, she's more naturally gifted. She's experienced. She has a father who was a big shot in the arts industry, who also, by the way, was one of the judges for the comedy competition that the Homo sapiens were competing in. So when the producer made Mitsuya the center of the group over Nikaido, something in her snapped. Even though she knew that Mitsuya had no intention of being the center and was really only there to like have fun, Nikaido still could not get past the blow to her pride. And so she told Mitsuya to meet her alone late at night in a part of the building where there are no cameras, fully prepared to kill Mitsuya if she didn't step down as center. But when she arrived, Mitsuya was already dead, or so she says. What struck me was the circumstantial nature of things. So Nikaido did not end up killing Mitsuya, if we believe what she says, but she could have. She totally could have. Things just happened in a way or in a sequence that spared her from doing it, which raises the uncomfortable question of how much distance is there really between someone who almost did a terrible thing and then someone who actually did do it. We look at certain people and say they're monsters, but aren't there really monsters in all of us? Nikaido was pushed to an extreme by jealousy and insecurity about herself. Most of us will never be pushed that far, but I think the show does seem to be making a point about how the capacity for committing a violent crime is more common than we like to think, that circumstance and opportunity perhaps play a much bigger role than character in a lot of cases. The other sick thing that happened was the cover-up afterwards. It was just so logistical, the way that the criminal organizational machine just kicked in to cover up the murder. Yano and Sekiguchi were called in to clean up. Yano being so typically like callous by snapping photos of Mitsuya's body and being like, ew. They made a deal where the Mystery Kiss girls basically work for them, and then a lie about Mitsuya running away from home was spun to get the parents to lodge a missing persons report and then to withdraw it. So everyone involved in the cover-up just kind of absorbed the murder and then moved on. However, it does make me think that all this happened without the big crime boss knowing. Like, it doesn't seem like he would make up that kind of story to his friend. And remember in the beginning, it looked like he actually really was sorry that Mitsuya had run away because of him. So I wonder if it'll really bite Yano and the rest of them in the ass later on. You know, Don Raku finds out that Yamamoto lied to him, tells the Tapir boss. Tapir boss gets mad because it's like his reputation on the line, and then he punishes Yamamoto and Yano for stepping out of line. I also think maybe there's a little bit of suspense in belief in that Don Raku just kind of took Yamamoto at his word and was like, oh, I guess my daughter really did run away from home, so I guess I will stop the search. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a minor thing, but I was like, I don't know if I trust this wily guy. As for Nikaido, her relationship with Baba was apparently the thing that stopped her from going mad with guilt. She described it as, I hated to lose, and his way of living permitted that. It could mean that Baba accepted her unconditionally without needing her to be successful, which is great. But it could also mean that she was drawn to him because in her eyes, he's a bit of a loser, you know, being the unambitious normie and the failed comedian at the time that he was. But at least that made her own failures feel less crushing Whether that is a strong basis on which to build a healthy relationship, though, is another question. Let's go to the scene where Tanaka showed up. So Dobu and Odokawa were about to retrieve the remaining 900 million yen, but Odokawa had planted the tracker device that he'd found on his taxi onto the van so that Tanaka would find them. Tanaka, man, is clearly at the end of his rope. He probably hadn't slept for weeks. He even admitted that he's kind of just bored with chasing the taxi driver that cost him his very special rare dodo. All he wants now is an apology, just acknowledgement that what happened to him happened and it sucked, that it matters. That was an interesting twist to me because it showed that Tanaka is suffering the special loneliness and despair of someone who can't move on from something terrible that happened to them years ago. Not because they haven't tried to, but because they never received the basic human recognition that a wrong was done to them. This guy lost years of his life grieving over something that no one really considered worth grieving over. And that in itself was almost as bad as the thing that actually happened to him. Of course, when it later came out that Dobu was Stitch 11, all because Odokawa just happened to be carrying the Donaku eraser in his pocket and then it fell out, Tanaka lost it. Mostly because he couldn't believe that Dobu doesn't remember jack shit about the scam. Either that or he doesn't really care. Or both. To Dobu, it was just one con out of thousands that he's pulled in his criminal career. That asymmetry, between Tanaka, who had his life absolutely destroyed, versus Dobu, who kind of just moved on without a second thought, that was devastating. And so Tanaka shot Dobu, and then immediately ran off screaming, which I think was a completely normal response. It also tells you that he's not really a killer, he never was. He just accumulated so much pain and shame and rage inside of him for all of these years that he had reached breaking point. And then when that moment was over, the reality of what he'd actually done hit him all at once. I'm not saying that he did nothing wrong, but it is recognizing that underneath all of that, Tanaka is still very human. The detail of Dobu miscounting the number of bullets left in his gun means that Tanaka wasn't the guy who shot Dobu's leg at the docks earlier, and the most likely candidate for that is little Daimon, whose gun mysteriously went missing. And as we know, he has a very strong feeling about punishing evil. So again, just another time that ODDTAXI showed us two separate events or two separate people and made us think it was the same person when really it wasn't. Speaking of the Daimon brothers, they provide an interesting look into what it actually means to enforce the law, or whether law and justice are even the same thing. And spoiler alert, they are often not. We always knew Big Daimon was a dirty cop, but it is ambiguous whether he was blackmailed into helping the gang. Did they make it clear that when he became a cop, that he was obligated to feed them intel because they'd raised him and his brother after their parents died, and that refusing to cooperate would be fatal? Or did he just feel obligated without anyone putting any explicit pressure on him? Because he would have been very, very young when the accident happened. And so you kind of wonder whether he felt obligated to the gang before he was even old enough to understand what obligation meant, which is really quite sad. What the Daimons illustrate on a broader level is that the people that we trust to uphold justice are sometimes themselves caught in the same webs of debt and obligations and coercion that compromise their ability to do what's right. Finally, I want to pay my respects to the cheeky, self-aware reference from Dobu. When he was pitching his scheme to rob both the bank and Yano, he named the plan ODDTAXI because the plan will only work if he and Odokawa work together, and Odokawa immediately bagged him for it. I liked that wink from the writers. If you wanted to expand the meta further, it's not just that the robbery won't work if Odokawa does not cooperate. It's also the fact that the entire show wouldn't work if it wasn't for Odokawa and his taxi. Everyone is connected to his taxi in some way, and a lot of the big events, including Mitsuya's murder, are centered around his taxi and around who drives that taxi. All right, guys, this is the last episode of ODDTAXI, episode 13. Here we go in 3, 2, 1, play. Mm. That's awful. Oh no. Ugh, this is like so much worse. That's like bare minimum parenting. But you're a kid, like you don't understand that. His dad takes him to go and see his like his mistress. Oh no, is he driving towards the sea? Oh, there was so much there that they just condensed into like the first couple of minutes. I feel like he's done. But everyone is just in the same place. Mm. I mean, ultimately, Nikaido is also just a kid. It's like humanizing a cold-blooded murderer. Oh no. Oh no. She took her mum's words maybe too seriously. And everyone just wallowing in the same place. Oh no. Dude, he hasn't even changed out of his blood-soaked jacket. Ugh. Okay, I'm not gonna remember that. Visual agnosia. Okay. Do you think Goriki buys that, or he's like, but there's also deeper psychological roots to why he sees people as animals? Maybe he should just stop. There's like police there now, right? Mio's like, he's not dying. God damn it. That's it. That was the shot. That's the money shot. Like literally. I mean, he should have taken it with himself in it. That's terrible, but oh my god, that was amazing. That was genius. Damn, they just tied everyone's stories and pasts and like future hopes and ambitions just together in that one scene. That was crazy. No. Do you think he's like, this is where I should have been? all those years ago. I should have died with my parents. Oh, shit. This is such a messed up childhood experience. So it could actually be real brain damage. That's just he's living in a community of animals now instead of humans. Okay, so it was the crime boss. How did they find him though? Like, did they just scour the news for newly created orphans? Mia, jeez, girl. She needs to become some kind of like special units forces. She has mad skills. How is she even carrying him up that far? Oh no, he's back in the land of the humans. Wow, Goriki actually does look like Goriki. She's cute. I mean, she's already cute as, llama. Dobby. Okay. Well, they confirmed that. I feel like his understanding of good and evil has evolved a little bit. She's an angel. Did she talk? Okay, Yano just looks like Yano. I mean, what would he get punished? Because he kind of also cooperated with Dobu. I mean, it's a bit complicated. Oh, Imai! He's also really cute. I mean, he'd probably be used as, a witness, a key witness, Odokawa. He is unsalvageable, this guy. An incurable optimist. I feel like out of all of this whole shit show, holy shit. He just carried it into the hospital in a paper bag. I mean, Imai just seems unscathed by all of this. Yeah, because I haven't arrested Sakura yet. He's a tapir. Is that what Goriki said? He's a tapir? Oh, yeah. Who's that cat he's been talking to? If she exists. There's a tapir. He's like, huh? What does that mean? So did he get out because he has more people in the police, like above Big Daimon? Mm. So we didn't know. Oh, I mean, those two, Yano and Dobu, totally. They're like shit on that rule. Ah, I mean, he probably doesn't need the money, but I'm sure he'll do the right thing with it. Oh, I get to see what's inside the closet. It's Probably just an actual cat. Yep. A black cat. Oh my god, he didn't even know if it was a human or not until his brain kind of fixed itself. That is incredible. That's Sakura. She's so small, like a kid. I mean, I know. I guess we kind of always knew they were all kids. She's a psycho. Oh shit. What's she holding in her hand? Like a lolly? It's a pen? Is she gonna get away? No, she can't. Because Odokawa knows. Is that Tanaka? And then uninstalling Zuden? Oh, you got better. All right, Taichi. Okay, some people get good endings. I mean, Kakiana doing an honest day's work. Who is that? Ichimura? I mean, I don't know why I should be saying Koriki, but oh shit. Oh shit. She needs to tie up loose ends. Oh my god. This leads into, I know there's a movie after this, which we will definitely watch. Is she actually going to try and attempt another murder? It's so crazy to me that they haven't uncovered her role in this yet. I guess Odokawa at this point hasn't gotten a chance to tell the police that he drove Sakura to the office on the same night that Mitsuya was discovered murdered. But how? I thought it would have been the first thing he would have told police as soon as he, woke up in the hospital. Oh, this is so scary. They did it. They managed to tie together most everything that happened on the night of Mitsuya, or rather Yuki's murder, and the aftermath of Odokawa crashing his taxi into the sea, and all the arrests of the gang members and Nikaido. And they also managed to give us, the full tragedy of Odokawa's backstory. It was brilliant. There are still some unanswered questions for me. Like, one of them actually is, what was the connection between Sakura and Tanaka? Because remember, she was the one who planted the tracker on Odokawa's taxi for him, and then somehow planted another tracker so that she was able to find him at the end of episode 13. Like, how did that happen? Did the police question her but then weren't able to hold her because they couldn't find anything on her? That being said, I really don't mind that they left that last bit kind of open-ended. Like, will Sakura ever get her comeuppance, or will she continue to live in her scary fantasy world of being an idol with poor Odokawa, like, literally just right there in front of her? Anyway, back to this final episode. They squeezed so much sympathy out of me for Odokawa's situation growing up. So not only was he bullied by other kids, but also by the teachers, which is just like, also his home situation was shit. Like, he had terrible parents. He had a dad who's always drunk and cheating, and a mum who's fed up with the situation and kind of just takes it out on Odokawa. And their home is trashed because his parents have just totally checked out. The things that he held onto as happy memories, they just made his situation even more stark. So his dad bought him that animal encyclopedia and took him to the zoo. And to a grossly neglected kid, those things mean the world. But when you shine the grim light of reality onto those memories, like, sure, his dad bought him a book, but maybe he should have also just tried actually parenting instead. Yes, he took him to the zoo, or rather, he dropped him off at the zoo alone just so that he could sneak off to be with his mistress. It was almost kind of a bribe for Odokawa's silence, and yet those are the best memories that Odokawa has of his dad, which is like the saddest thing. His career as a taxi driver also made sense in light of his past. Like, he loves driving because his happiest memories are centered around being in a car, like being taken somewhere. Even the accident that killed his parents and could have killed him was in his mind, bizarrely, like just a pleasant night out driving with his family. The fact that his depressed mom drove them off a bridge in a murder-suicide and his brain categorized it as a pretty good day is really tragic and twisted, because relative to everything else in his life, it was a pretty good day. Being together in a car drive, that was as close to family as he got. There was also the line about when he was recounting the horrible experience of being bullied, where he said that he just wanted to disappear. And that's kind of what becoming a taxi driver allows you to do. It's the perfect disappearing act in the sense that you're there, but invisible. So you're constantly with people, but they don't really see you. It's almost a very elegant solution that Odokawa came up with to deal with the fact that he is terrified of people. I appreciated how the details of his childhood, like enjoying going to the zoo and getting an animal encyclopedia, even being bullied by kids who called him a walrus, how they all related back to they called it his visual agnosia. Speaking of Odokawa being a walrus, that detail, I think, is one of the show's most quietly cruel touches, because the first person to consider Odokawa as a walrus was not himself. It was the kids bullying him at school. They were mocking him for being, chubby and slow. But Odokawa, he kind of just absorbed that label and took ownership of it. He was like, I like walruses. He also saw his mum as a walrus. So he took what was derogatory and built an identity out of it. And the fact that we've been seeing him as a walrus, it's weird, right? Because it's the thing that kids called him to mock him, and then it's like we, the audience, are seeing him as a walrus this whole time. It's just weird. It's also tragic, but you also kind of have to admire Odokawa for doing that, for taking on that identity. It was said that his condition of seeing people's animals was ostensibly from the brain damage that he suffered during the accident. But there was also a sense that there are deeper psychological reasons for him retreating into a world where everyone is an animal. Like, he struggles to speak with humans, so why not make them less threatening by turning them into animals? So when he woke up from the hospital and could suddenly see humans again and even talk to them, except for like women, it suggests that his recovery wasn't just a physical or a medical one. It's also psychological. He's learned slowly to trust and to let people in, and he's really dismantled some of his long-standing fears about other people. I really like that about this last episode. Like, it felt earned, after 12 episodes of seeing things from his perspective, of seeing everyone as animals, and then only in this last episode having him perceive human faces again. I really hope in the future that Odokawa is able to genuinely make happy memories with his friends, like his true friends, the one that he's learned to let in. We have to talk about this beautiful scene where Odokawa drove his taxi off the bridge. I mean, it should have been a terrifying one, but it was like this E.T. moment where everything slowed down. The money is flying out of his boot. My favorite thing about it was the way that they tied everyone's deepest thoughts and desires and emotional arcs together into that same symbolic moment. And the fact that they did it with no narration, no dialogue, just images showing each character and a certain memory of theirs that held so much significance for them. Obviously, Odokawa was reliving the moment his mom drove him and his dad off the bridge, but then you also had Taichi, who just so happened to catch the shot of the car in mid-flight in a selfie, when he was reminiscing about his glory days of being a viral sensation. And he's just reflecting on how that taste, that small taste of being someone who mattered in the world, ultimately did not make him happy. In that moment, he was like, oh, I do kind of miss that attention. But then in the end, he knew that the better choice is to let that go and just build a life that isn't dependent on how many strangers have their eyes on you and are giving you likes. There was Tanaka who remembered that moment. His phone dropped into the gutter and he lost the dodo that he'd been throwing obscene amounts of money at. And it's a moment where we remember that underlying his addiction was his sense of worthlessness. You know, looking around and feeling fundamentally lesser than the people around you who seem to have accomplishments and talent and status that you don't. The instant that he stopped placing his value into having a thing or realizing that he does have intrinsic value as a human being, that's when he was able to, kind of like Tai Chi, build a meaningful life that's not dependent on external achievements. Kakihana saw the ring that he'd bought for Ichimura, and similarly, he was a man who desperately needed to be seen as someone who has achieved something, you know, who is worth something to another person. He fixated on Ichimura not out of love, but just out of a need to have someone reflect back to him that he is worthy. I loved how at the end we saw him living just as himself, but also being okay with that and even having friends who are like, hey, let's go for lunch. Like that was really, really nice. Ichimura remembered the bath, you know, that one small refuge from her constant shame of coming from a less well-off background. I guess her arc was about learning that her worth isn't tied to what she has. I mean, that's probably also the arc of most characters in Odd Taxi. But it's also a really hard thing to accept about yourself when you've spent your whole life receiving the opposite message from other people who look down on you for being poor or whatever. So I love that for Ichimura, they showed her at the end connecting with Goriki and Miho and just like genuinely having a good time. Because I think those are two well-adjusted adults who I think could really set her straight in terms of showing her that there is a better way to live and that you don't have to live your life for other people, to show other people that, you know, you are worth something. And for Nakado, it was the awful memory of disfiguring Yuki's body and just dumping it into the bottom of the sea. She notably did show some remorse at the end of the show. Like she had wanted to turn herself in, but it was Yamamoto who stopped her. It wasn't exactly a redemption, but it was an acknowledgement that even Nikaido has a line, you know, has a hint of a conscience. Finally, for murderer Sakura, seeing Odokawa's taxi brought up the memory of her mom's karage, the love of a tired single mom who nevertheless still found the time and the energy to cook for her daughter despite how tough things were. I think it was left deliberately vague whether Sakura had committed murder more out of a desperation to improve her and her mother's situation in life, but I think there was also enough there to show that she's also very much driven by jealousy and greed and a whole lot of psycho. The desperation inside of her has somehow curdled into something really dark, and she is very unsettling in that she is clearly someone who does care deeply for her mom, but she also is absolutely cold-blooded and ruthless. And to her, there's no conflict there. So for everyone who saw Odokawa nosedive off a bridge, everyone except Sakura, that is, that moment sparked something in them. It made them think, what kind of life do I want to live after this? Like, am I still going to remain imprisoned by my worst impulses and pursue things that don't really benefit me in the end? The fact that Sakura felt nothing afterwards and didn't change, you know, just like she felt nothing after murdering Yuki. Actually, I would say if you go back to that scene where she is like strangling Yuki to death, there's nothing in her eyes. Like they somehow made her absolutely like a zombie. That makes her the show's one character who represents what happens when the desperation to be famous or to be someone important has eaten away at and then completely replaced what used to be human inside. And then tying that back to this episode being the one episode where we do finally see their human forms, it was Sakura where I was like, she's the only one where her human face doesn't really change the fact that she inside isn't really human after all. What a way to tie up most everyone's storylines in less than a minute or two. Like, it still blows my mind, that scene. There are also some broader themes that I felt that Odd Taxi presented as a series. The first one is the cost of ambition. Ironically, who actually ends up dead on this show? It was the only member of Mystery Kiss who didn't want to be the center, who wasn't really ambitious and kind of just wanted to be there to create some nice memories. I think the show asks, in a cutthroat entertainment industry, does surviving require a certain degree of ruthlessness? Nakaido certainly thought so. And the fact that along comes someone like Baba, who seems to succeed despite his lack of ambition and ruthlessness, I think that would have, to her, seemed quite unfair given everything that she'd sacrificed to get to where she was and what she was prepared to do to get what she wanted. The tragedy is Nakaido is probably mostly right about the industry. Like, it does reward unscrupulous people. It's just that she was completely wrong about the solution, which was murder. There's also a sense that ambition comes with its own costs. Like, sure, maybe like Sakura, her ambition and a lack of conscience got her what she wanted, but you can't say that it cost her nothing. Like, in fact, it cost her her very humanity. The second thing that stood out to me is self-deception and moral performance. And I feel like the two characters who both had a certain degree of performative righteousness were Dobu and Yamamoto. Dobu is someone who presented as a man with an honor code, even as he scams people and uses violence to earn money. But really, when push comes to shove, he reveals himself as someone who doesn't give a shit about anyone but himself. Meanwhile, the nature of Yamamoto's relationship with the Mystery Kiss girls, and especially with Nakaido, who seemed to be a favorite of his, is never really fully resolved. Does he genuinely care about her? Like, is he being protective, or is he just protecting his investment and his shot at the big money? I feel the show kept that ambiguous enough that you can't really be sure. What you can be sure of, though, is that Yamamoto, at the end of the day, was also someone who wouldn't be above murder if it meant that he could be the man behind the success of Mystery Kiss. So in some ways, he's not that much different to Sakura. Interestingly, the guy to compare Dobu and Yamamoto with is Kuroda, the Tapir crime boss. So he heads a criminal organization, which I'm assuming engages in all of the normal activities of a crime gang. And yet he carries himself with also a kind of like moral authority expressed in his one rule, do not kill. But I think the show also asks you to interrogate that moral authority, because you can cause a huge amount of damage and hurt to people's lives through certain criminal activities. You can absolutely wreck their finances and their relationships and their families, their health, their futures, without ever crossing, the murder threshold. And then there was the matter of the foundation. The same crime gang running scams and whatever other criminal activities that they do funnels that money that they earn into raising orphans. On the surface, it's a nice thing to do, but you also can't avoid acknowledging that it is also a convenient way to launder money, or, to buy a community's silence on your other less, worthy activities. Could Kuroda genuinely care for orphans? Sure. Is it also a convenient outlet for his illegally attained income? Absolutely. That is all to say, the show's most dangerous characters aren't openly evil and corrupt. In fact, I think they're the ones who have convinced themselves that they're the good guys. Another key theme that the series covered really well through its stories is one that we're all very familiar with, living in the modern world as we do. And that is the ills of the addiction and the attention economies. Through characters like Taichi and Tanaka and Sakura and some others, Odd Taxi dealt very sharply with how these modern systems of social media, of gacha games, and, the idol industry, how they're all engineered to exploit the fundamental sense of worthlessness that a lot of us feel. And then they cleverly sell you a temporary fix that isn't really a fix, but is something that can grow into an addiction or an obsession that then has the capacity to ruin your life. Odd Taxi also has this through line of tragedy that runs through most of its characters. There's nobody in this show who isn't suffering. I mean, except maybe like Imai and Goriki. Miho gets drawn into a terrible situation she didn't choose. The Daimon brothers lost their parents in an accident, which led the older brother down a path of being a corrupt cop. Odokawa also lost his parents young as well. You know, Ichimura grows up in a poor family. Like, the show is quite insistent that suffering is universal and it shapes you in ways that you don't always see. The question is never whether someone is suffering or broken or not, because everyone is in some way, big or small, but rather what's critical is what you choose to do with that brokenness and what kind of meaning you take from it. Finally, I just want to say that waiting until episode 13 to reveal everyone in human form, after 12 episodes of seeing them as animals, that was an elegant piece of symbolism. You know, for 12 episodes, we've been seeing how Odokawa perceives things. But this last episode was one where almost every character has their reckoning. That bridge scene in particular was when they saw themselves clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time. And then they confront what they've done and what they could still choose to do differently. And it's precisely after that moment, you know, the moment where they become more self-aware and then capable of genuine positive change, is also the moment where the show finally lets us see them as fully human. And I thought that was brilliant because it's like you only get to see who someone really is when they are willing to look at themselves honestly. ODDTAXI withheld their true forms until the characters had earned it, or were at least, you know, reaching towards a better, more real version of themselves. Funnily enough, I mentioned that Yano, even in human form, still looks like a porcupine to me. So maybe it's not a coincidence that the guy who looks most the same is probably also the guy who has changed the least, or who has the least remorse for his actions. That's it, guys. Thank you for coming along on this wild, wild ride with me. I loved the series. I think it was a surprisingly honest look at the sobering realities of things like loneliness and addiction and lack of self-worth and the cruelty of circumstances and so much more. And all of that wrapped in a quirky mystery thriller. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and we will be taking a short break before kicking off some new anime series on this channel. So look out for that, and until next time we come back for more anime, take care.